and how that can be very, very useful in the work that you're doing. Now, the plan should include an executive summary that details the mission, vision, goals, and objectives of the organization. I want to reiterate, it should be pretty short. Somebody who has a one-page vision is not doing it right. It should be two, 3 sentences at the most. And the mission is how you see things of the organization at this point, and the vision is where you see yourself in the future. And the goals and objectives, you want to be as specific as possible. And this will all be very helpful to have this in when you're working on your proposal. Because almost any grant is going to ask, what are your goals and what are your objectives? And this should be reflected on your website. We'll talk more about that as we move forward. You should also include the organization's legal, management, and financial structure. It should be professional, efficient, and transparent. I want to emphasize here the legal aspects. All of you, by assuming leadership within an organization, are assuming a fiduciary, a legal responsibility that you will be handling the resources correctly. But it also means that if you sign a contract with a donor, and the contract says that you have to put in 30% counterpart, and you're committing to come up with that, and if you don't, you're violating the contract. You have to make sure that any legal responsibility that you are assuming, that you can do it. And I've seen organizations that have collapsed because they assume responsibilities for counterpart and then don't have the resources, and they end in default of the financing. So my suggestion is that as you grow, you need to count on legal advice. I'm not saying that you should have a lawyer run the organization, because lawyers, the first thing they will want to make sure is they're mitigating the risk, which is what their roles should in part be. You want their advice. So that's extremely important in any grant process, that you're covered from a legal perspective and you're also counted from an accounting perspective. If they required audited balance sheets, you should have audited balance sheets. There are some organizations that don't require it, but most will want to see your audited balance sheets. And if you can, try to get an auditing firm that has at least a national or international recognition. A lot will depend on the level of funding that you're working with. If you're a $50,000 a year organization, you're not going to be paying $10,000 for an auditor. But if you're a $500,000 organization, I suggest you invest $10,000 in an auditor, and that you have a legal advisor on hand. And what a lot of organizations do is they will have a lawyer on the board. And that person will also help to protect the interests of the organization, but also for you to cover your backs. Because you don't want to be in a position that you have to face legal issues because you did not do things properly. And it could also be not that money is being stolen, you just did not follow procedures. And you did not read the fine line in a contract that says you're supposed to put 30% in counterpart, 15% in cash, 15% in in-kind, and you don't have the cash, you have the in-kind, and they say, well, where's the in-kind? And you don't have the money, but you've already received money from the donor. You could be in legal jeopardy. So these are things that one has to be very, very careful, and that should be looked at in a fundraising plan. You should be specific about the goals of the organization. Are you making a difference in the lives of your communities? The challenge is to serve our beneficiaries, but able to get the resources that are needed. Make sure your goal includes innovations. Once again, are you having an impact? And what is a very important phenomena in fundraising in the United States is social impact investing. You know, we were talking briefly about different corporations and so on. There are now a lot of donors that are investing because they know that organization is having an impact. And that is key. If you're not having an impact, you will have trouble getting the resources that you need. So they're called social impact investment funds. And it's becoming more also prevalent with big corporations. You also have to be very clear about your fundraising goals. How much money is needed to fund specific programs and operations? How many of you know what percentage of your operations goes to overhead and how much goes to programs? How many of you have that broken down? 2, 3? Okay. It is important that you understand that. You have to understand what is going to programming and what is going to overhead. One of the biggest difficulties that the nonprofit sector is facing in the United States is too much money is going to overheads. Because executives over organizations are getting very big salaries. I'm sure that's not the case here because it's a smaller sector. But still, you want to be sure that you're not putting 70-80% of your income in overhead. And when I ran the foundation in Bolivia, we had 70 people working in our foundation. We never bought a vehicle. While the international NGOs all had the latest Toyotas. They put a lot of money into vehicles, they all had fancy offices, they all lived in beautiful homes. We were a national organization, so we could never afford it. But we managed millions of dollars of projects. But our projects went to programs, and my work was pro bono because I was president of the foundation, so I could not be at the same time be collecting a salary. So I did other things to make a living. But I was clear what my role as the president was, even though I developed and got a lot of the funds, I was not the one benefiting from the resources. And our overhead was minimal because I provided my own offices for the foundation until it got on its own. So it's important that you look at what are the specific program costs and operations. And for that, you need a budget. And you should always work off a budget. This will make your fundraising process so much easier. But if you have a budget of $100,000, you should spell out what is for human resources, what is for, you should also spell out in-kind contributions. If Microsoft is giving you $50,000 worth of software, you should put that in, because it is an income. It's in kind, but it's still an income. So it's important to break down what are CapEx, operational expenses, and break it down as much detail as possible in your budget, because that will also help you when you are going after money to have a breakdown of what your expenses are. And make sure that you keep your overhead at a manageable level. Okay. I'm not saying keep it as low as possible because it doesn't always make sense to keep it as low as possible. At the same time, you also want to make sure that the people working for you are paid adequately. Just because you're working for an NGO doesn't mean that you should be giving your time away. Your time is valuable. Now, one thing is to be a volunteer. And volunteers go in knowing that they will not be paid or they'll only be having their expenses covered. But if you're going as an employee, you as the leader of an organization should not assume that that person should get minimum wage and not be treated fairly. So you have to find a balance. And what I have found in organizations, such as when I was doing work with Habitat, there was no plan for women when they had a baby. You have to take a vacation to have a baby. And this is an international organization that works for the benefit of society, but it was treating its own employees in a horrible way. So that's also what you need to look at, that you as an organization are being fair to your employees. An important part of that is making sure that they have health insurance and that there's paid leave for men and women when they have kids. And that's not easy, because it also has cost repercussions. I'm amazed to see how many organizations, non-for-profits, who are working for men, for helping improve the lives of women and children, are not treating their employees fairly. So that's also part of what you have to do, because if they're not being treated fairly, they're not going to make the commitment that you need to make your organization successful. You also have to understand what is your principal source of income. Where is it coming from? Are you dependent on one source? In an organization like World Vision, a lot of the funds come from overseas, I gather. No? But you also have commitment to raise things locally. And you need to understand that. And you need to know, well, USAID is giving you so much. Well, what happens if USAID's funds are cut back? How will that affect you? What are your most reliable sources of income? Which are the least reliable? What is also a growing trend is seeing how businesses can be created that will help sustain an organization. And we'll talk more about that in social businesses. And to understand which income sources have the best growth potential. You also need to look at the strengths of the very different stakeholders, the programs, the staff, the board of directors, volunteers, we already talked briefly about that. The organizational structure and administration, very important. If you have an organization that has 30 board members, you're going to be in trouble. You may have advisors, but if you have too many people trying to run an organization, it's not going to work. My recommendation in any structure of setting up an organization is to put up to 11, because that gives you the flexibility of having 7 or 9 or 11. You always want to have odd numbers so that you can always break a tie. Hopefully you won't need to, but it's good to have that. That has to be spelled out in your statutes. And then you can set up an advisory group if you want to bring more people in. But the board has to assume the responsibilities, and it should be clearly spelled out. What is their role? In the case of the United States, to become a board member, you often have to commit to donate money or buy tickets for galas or put in time or do things for the organization. But here you should be very clear, what is the board member going to be doing? Will they be helping you identify funding sources? Will they be providing money? Will they be providing legal advice? But if you bring in a board members that are all your friends and you get together and have some drinks and a meal once a month and don't have specific tasks and responsibilities, it's not going to go anywhere. The board is absolutely essential for resource mobilization. I was part of an organization where the board was a very wealthy person, and she was worth $400 million. And she was brought in to be the president of this organization, and she donated $1,000 after 2 years. And was using part of the personnel of the organization for her own personal use. She was using the secretary to do all her banking and running around. And she was doing an exhibit for her boyfriend, using foundation staff. And I checked with my lawyer at the foundation, and I said, well, this smells. And the lawyer said, no, it doesn't smell, it stinks. I had to initiate legal action against the president of my foundation because she was violating the law. Eventually I got her fired. But it was a very complicated process, but I prevailed because that person was violating the law in several ways. You cannot use the benefits or what you have as an organization for your own personal benefit. You cannot have personnel that is working for the organization and receiving funding internationally and then use it for your own personal benefit. And that will take, we'll talk more about ethics and fundraising. What happened to our, I need to Who's in charge of the computers here? This just died. They're asking for the password. Is there something I do here? It's on my computer. Oh, okay, no. Yeah. So you have to understand also the funding base, the community connections, and who the clients, customers, and audience are. Timeline and budgets. You have to have in your implementation plan the budget. We've talked about that. What funds are needed? What will they be used for? Identify CapEx and OpEx. It's capital expenditures and operational expenditures. In a way, it's the same for running a business. And I think one of the important things is that you need to look at an NGO in a way that is similar, but also very different from a for-profit organization. And more, they're looking at the for-profit models in terms of managing and making use of resources. The big difference is that any profits that are generated from an organization have to go back into that organization, and that organization is serving a social or an environmental cause. It's not there to make money. But a lot of the tools that are used in for-profit businesses can be very useful. Calculate a social return on investment. In the business, it's the internal rate of return. Well, here is the social rate of return. If you're investing in education, how many people are you reaching? What is the impact that you're having? But you also have to be very careful about that. Because there are organizations, they say, we want you to train 50 teachers and provide medical services to 1,000 people. And they want it measured in 2 years. But the impact could be much more than just training the 50 teachers. It's also how you're affecting the kids, and if the teachers are doing a correct job. So that is one of the things one has to be very careful about international donors, is they're too often focused on results that can be measured in numbers, and not necessarily in true impact. And that's why it's part of, I think, your training and preparation is to really know what is the real impact that you're having. How are you affecting the lives of people in the community? Because I think in the end, what we're all trying to do is affect the lives of others in a positive way. You know, whether environmental or working with people with disabilities, we all want to have an impact. But be very careful of what you have to put in, and we'll talk more about monitoring and evaluation in this process. You have to demonstrate that your organization and programs are viable, sustainable, and your proposal is terrific. Be clear on your requirements for funds, your cash flow, and how you will cover fixed costs. I already mentioned that. Yes?
So how do you calculate the social impact?
How do you calculate what?
Social impact?
The social impact? Well, one of the processes is to do a monitoring and evaluation, where and we'll talk, we have a slide about that, where you establish the baseline, and then from there you see how the funds are impacting, and then you have a monitoring and evaluation specialist that works with you. If you can't afford one, if your organization is small, then you need to follow the experiences of monitoring and evaluation, and that will help you measure impact. But in a project, especially an internationally funded project, my suggestion is to get a monitoring and evaluation specialist to help you with that.
What did you say, the CapEx?
Pardon?
CapEx is what does it?
CapEx, capital expenditures. So how much are you investing in construction, in equipment, versus operating expenditures? You know? Donor stewardship. There are courses that are given on just donor stewardship. New York City University has a program about donor stewardship. It's very important. Keep your investors and donors informed on the financial and operational aspects of your work. if they're not informed, they will probably not donate again. Very important. Provide donors with what they require upon donating or investing. If they want a report, give them a report. Send regular reports and invite supporters to events you organize. If you are having a 10-kilometer race, invite them, either to run or to sponsor or to be a bystander. Make sure that they feel part of what you're doing. That will make a big difference. And this is if they're a personal donor or if they're a corporate donor. Make sure they know. Donor stewardship and trust are very important in the resource mobilization process. And with companies, it's also extremely important that you involve the employees of a company. And this is a growing field in the United States and Europe where personnel at a company will donate part of their time with the backing of the company to help your organization. So if you need to do a business plan or a feasibility study and you don't have the resources, approach a bank. I'm working now with a banker who's helping me do a business plan. He's donating his time. So if you don't have the resources, get people from companies or individuals that can then donate their time because they are supporting a worthy cause. And hopefully the company will recognize that time and give them time off from their work to help. And a lot of companies have that. It's very, very important that you make use of skills that you do not have. And to me, it is essential. Surround yourself with people to do the things that you cannot do. If you think you can do everything, forget it. I can read spreadsheets, but I could never put together a spreadsheet and a balance plan and all the formulas. I don't have the experience. I can read it, I can change it, but there are people who are wizards at it. I can't put together a WordPress website, but I know how to put the text and I know how to structure it and how to make it operable, but I get people to do it. And that's where you can count on volunteers to do a lot of things. Research funders that support ideas like yours, particularly those interested in your location or sector. That's where you can also get volunteers to research. And it's extremely important in the resource mobilization, is finding out through the chambers. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a great example. What U.S. companies are working here or have U.S. connections? What are connections from other countries? And it's not just the mining, it's also the service companies. I've gotten donations, several $100,000 of donations from Microsoft in software. We'll talk more about that. The window of opportunity only opens for brief moments. You must be prepared when you're dealing with donors. Research financing opportunities. Consider setting up a donor management system. How many of you have a donor management system? I'm sure that World Vision has one. It is an extremely useful tool. There's some free versions out there, others that you have to pay. Okay. It helps manage your relations with donors. It organizes donors and campaigns into categories. It helps track existing and new donors, widening the donor base. Allows for integrating data with letters, emails, proposals, and newsletters. It integrates a payment system with donations. Allows the rapid recognition of donors and can help organize annual appeals, capital campaigns, special events, and grant tracking. And one, just to use an example, is mobile calls. It's an app for getting donations online. It can also work on your computer. They've approached me for one of the projects to provide the services. I'm not working with them, but I have a full presentation about mobile donations. That is a growing field, and if you have time, we'll cover some of that. But amount of money that is now coming through the web, through your computer and smartphone is growing exponentially. And part of it is links up with the donor management system. There's one company called Constant Contact. You will have your template letter. You send out bulletins through email. We used to send about 11,000 a month. And probably a third of them were donors. They would receive a donation, the system would put a letter together with a name of the person, the amount that was donated, and would send it out. So there are really some cool tools for this available, and I'll be giving you more background. A donor management system will evaluate the needs of your organization. Understand how you relate to your donors. And this is the process you need to go before you choose one. I spent a couple months doing comparison. It was an 8-page document comparing all the donor management systems to see what made the most sense for the organization. Examine the installation and maintenance cost. Is your donor management system going to be online, or is it going to be in the cloud? The tendency is for it all go to the cloud. That's important. It also helps not having to have it on a server. But it also involves training. Because in the organization, there must be at least 2 people who can manage that. Because there's always turnover. And you don't want to have one person who owns the donor management system and then nobody else has access if that person leaves or gets sick. Evaluate the availability of resources and budget investments. If you're a bigger organization, it's worth paying for this, not only the software, but the support you will give. Prepare a comparative chart of the disadvantages of each system and advantages. And what's a very useful organization is called idealware.org. It's a non-for-profit. And they have a lot of information about donor management systems. It is one of the most important investments you can do as you are growing as an organization. I'm going to talk briefly about the use of information and communications technology. When we consider that 10 years ago or 11 years ago there was no smartphones, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the web 20 years ago did not exist. When I worked on my museum projects, we had a fax. That was what we used. I used a telex to communicate. Things have changed dramatically. And if you think you can get things done without being abreast of what is happening in the field of information and communication technology, forget it. And this is not something for just young people who should be specializing in social media. All of us have to know about it. All of us. I don't consider myself an expert on I use these different tools quite a bit and understand the importance. But you have social media specialists that can help you put together Twitter's accounts and do the operational part. But you have to know how to use these tools. So use the most appropriate and useful software and hardware tools. Keep your website and social media sites up to date. We'll talk more about that. Use a system for handling donations and donor relations. Keep abreast of the latest advances in the field of information communication technology. Communications is essential. Now, one of the workshops that I give is on crisis leadership, and what you do preparing for crises. One of the issues is communications. What happens if you're working in an area where there's an epidemic, or there's an earthquake, or there's a hurricane, and you need to communicate, and the cell towers go out? What do you do? If you're working in emergency services as an NGO, you want to be prepared. And what has happened in the United States, and you have the case of Puerto Rico, where the whole cell phone system went out and the whole power system went out, they were without communications for weeks. So you have to also anticipate what can be done from communications. And for remote communications, where you don't have cell towers, to me the best solutions are VSATs. If you haven't looked into it or if not familiar, do some research. Very small aperture terminals. It's a two-way satellite system. You can establish it anywhere, and you can use solar power to generate electricity. So that, for example, is extremely useful for emergency use, but also for connecting remote sites, for clinics or schools or projects. Because as much as you can afford and can do, you should have connectivity in all the projects that you're working on. And now with the technologies, it is possible. There are now systems that are built on Wi-Fi called WiMAX, where you can send a signal 40 kilometers with an antenna that costs $1,000. And then you can go another 40 kilometers with another $1,000. So you can cover 80 kilometers with $2,000. So costs have come down, technologies have changed dramatically. And now you can use the cell signal to convert for data, so you can also down through the internet information. So it's extremely important that you focus in on what is available and what makes most use for your organization. How many of your organizations have a IT specialist on staff? 2, 3, 4. Now, a lot of organizations don't need it or can't afford it. But have people that you can bring in to help you. Okay? And that's where you can bring in students. I've had some brilliant students who've done websites and who set up things. But it is important for you as leaders of an organization to understand what the technologies are that are out there and what they can do. If you have to put together a donor management system, you should know what it is and how that can serve your organization. So this takes me to marketing communication strategies. They are an essential part of fundraising. But it's not just fundraising, it is an essential part of what you're doing as an organization. When I was working at the Grand Egyptian Museum, there was not one single marketing and communications person on staff for this $1 billion project. Not one. So when they had to send out a press release, they had to scramble to see who could write a press release. And one month they sent one with different information, another month with different information. There was no marketing communication strategy. One press release said the museum's going to open in 2015. It didn't. Another said it's going to open in 2018. It hasn't. And it wasn't clear where it was going. And there was no budget for marketing communications. So it is critical for an organization. If you can't afford a marketing communications expert, internally see who can assume part of that. But you can also either hire people for specific functions or bring in students. Talk to the journalism school, have somebody there who can help you with press releases. They get experience. Eventually they might end up working with you. I've had many volunteers who started as volunteers who ended up working for me. You know? Develop a marketing communication plan that builds on your institution's plan. The marketing communications plan is not something that a marketing communication expert develops separately of the strategic plan. That person has to be an integral part of the overall strategic plan of your organization. Work on the branding and corporate identity of your organization. Branding is extremely important. It is not just having a good logo. That is another course that could be hours talking about branding and corporate identity. Make sure it's simple. Okay. Make sure that it works on social media, that you can see your logo on your smartphone, you can see it on your website, and that it's clearly identifiable. Don't make it too complicated. Make it functional, make it elegant, make it beautiful. And I've seen some examples of logos that are, and brands that are horrible. And it affects how you are perceived by others if you do not have a professional looking brand. It doesn't cost much to do it. But it makes all the difference to have that. You know? And the corporate identity involves not just the brand. It involves also, involves your website, involves any videos that you might have to show what you're doing. You know? It's also important that an organization that's been around for 10, 15 years to look at your brand. And rebranding is often a solution that is needed by an organization. And take a serious look at your brand and have an expert, if you don't have the expertise, critique it and say, what can you do better? It will facilitate the fundraising process. Involve communication personnel in the fundraising efforts. Don't do all the fundraising strategies and plans and then tell the communications person, well, now I want you to do a press release or send out a notice. They should be involved in the whole planning process of the strategic plan, fundraising plan, because they can provide input. And as I said, if you do not have a communications marketing team, bring in volunteers or pay somebody for the specific service that you need. Elaborate the key messages for your organizations. If the key messages of your organizations are going to be 2 pages long, forget it, nobody's going to read it. Design a plan to reach out to social and other media with your messages. A fundamental change has taken place with the wide use of Twitter. People are more and more used to small, shorter messages. And I think for the younger generations, they're more used to reading shorter texts. So also be looking at what audience are you trying to reach. Be innovative in the use of existing media. If you have a video that you want to show about your work, if you have a 10 or 15 minute video, they're not going to watch it. A 2-minute video, a 1-minute video, yes. So that's part of your marketing efforts, but it's also part of fundraising. Videos are an important part of your marketing effort. And more, the use of video clips are gaining importance in the website, but also in smartphones. You need understand to get specific about your support goals. You want supporters that are donors, volunteers? How many? Who is your target market? Who are these new supporters that you're hoping to reach? What causes do they want to support? It's extremely important to understand who are you addressing them to. When I was supporting Habitat, usually donors who were 55 and above, they love to make donations through direct mail systems. Direct mail is a very interesting and positive way of raising money, but it can also be costly. Somebody in their 30s would do it through their smartphone. So be clear on who you're trying to reach and how you're going to reach them. If you think you can reach different generations the same way, forget it. Once again, your brand. What does your nonprofit do specifically in sound bites? Let's make this sound attractive to your new supporters. I was in Panama recently, and there is a organization there that is working with children. And their logo was a cupola of a building. And it was designed by an architect years ago who was part of the board. And I asked them, what does the design of a cupola of a church have to do with what you're doing with children? And they said nothing. And they said, but that's what we got from our previous management. Said, you need to rebrand. A cupola done by an architect has nothing to do with what you are doing. So be critical of what you have, you know, and be ready to make change. So there are 4 processes that are critical to the success of any marketing effort, and these can and should be applied to both annual plans and individual marketing. Establish and articulate objectives. What are the objectives of your organization? Define the strategy. Execute the tactics of the program within budget. Measure, report, and refine. Within budget's important. Your plan should also include, if you're going to be doing marketing of products or services, are you going to be taking out ads in local newspapers? Are you going to be doing TV spots? Are you going to be doing direct mail? How many of you use direct mail for your fundraising and marketing efforts? So it's done very little here, direct mail, correct? Mm-hmm. It is a great tool, but it can also be an expensive tool. What's still very popular in the United States is I get requests for donations and they send me return address labels or they send you calendars. And that's expensive if you're going to do that, because only the rate of return is usually 1 to 3% of the people who receive that direct mail will respond. And if each packet costs you $10, you have to put a lot of money to be able to get a return. What I have found is direct mail is extremely important as a way to get support from donors. But keep it simple. Often a card telling the story of a beneficiary is sufficient. People are not going to read a 8-page brochure. They will look at a card and then put the information for making donations. Keep it simple. Your objectives is a great way to spell out what you're doing. Beware of the temptation to set the bar low. That is choosing objectives that you know you can easily achieve. Select goals you can realistically achieve by working hard and working smart. And make sure you complement your tangible, measurable goals with other less quantifiable but not less important goals. That is important for fundraising, but it's also very, very important for managing your business, your organization. The website is one of the key aspects of what you need to do or are doing, I'm sure. Everybody here has a website, correct, for their organization?
Yes.
Anybody not have a website? Okay, several don't. Okay. It is not expensive to do one. And if you can't afford to put one together, get a volunteer to do it. One of the most popular software platforms is WordPress. You also have Wix. Some of these you can do on your own. Okay. You must first, you want to have a modern website, and it is important that your website integrates with your smartphone. Because it is terrible if you have a website that you then try to open through your smartphone and you cannot read it because the letter is so small. And all these softwares like WordPress and Weebly and Wix allow the complete integration between a smartphone and a website. So it should be effective. If you want to have donations made, there should be a donate button on it. And you have to establish the accounts and make it easy for people to donate. More and more donations in the United States are being done through websites. You have to choose a domain and register it. How are domains registered here? Is it through, do you use GoDaddy here as well? Or do you have your own registry system for Mongolia? How does it work? Anybody know? Yes.
We will own registry system.
What?
Data.com.
It's called what?
Data.com.
Datacom is how you register it, from Mongolian address. Yeah, and you register it here. Okay. And how much does it cost for a domain here?
88,000
per year.
88,000.
So
So about $30 some per year, correct?
Yes.
And to get the domain itself, how much do you pay for a domain? $55. Okay. In the United States, you can get a domain for $11, $15, depending on, and the main domain is GoDaddy, you know, or the seller of domains. And maintaining it per year is about that. But it's important that you keep abreast of your domains and your expiration of your domains, and define who has access to your domain. Because what happens if the person who registered the domain in that person's name and that person leaves? I've seen cases where institutions haven't been able to make any changes to their domain, or their computer went on the brain and they haven't updated it for a long time and they're not able to update it. And I have the foundation that I did a website 10 years ago. I haven't updated because I'm not working on it, but it's still up there. I need to update it. It's important, especially in the areas that you're working on, to keep it updated. And there are attractive website themes that you can choose. More and more, the tendency is to have one big photograph and one catchy title. Don't make it too heavy. Visually, it has to be light. But it is essential for fundraising that you have a decent website. It has to be user-friendly, and Google will love it. How many of you know the word search engine optimization? It is extremely important. Search engine optimization. It is the number of visitors that are going to your website. This is defined often by Google. The search engine. You want to make sure that you have a very good search engine optimization, because that means that people are looking at your website. So you want to have keywords. And you don't want complicated words. You don't want too many words. If you're working in health, care, children, you know, be smart about what you're using. But if you want people to visit your website, make sure you have search magnets that will make it attractive. But it's a term, and look in the web. What is search engine optimization? And this is something that Google is the leading player in the world on. Posting a new blog and adding a new web page. Blogs are becoming more and more important. And it's a good way to keep your partners involved. Add written content, but also use links and photographs. A website should not take you more than a week to put together. But I've seen organizations that haven't updated, organizations that are working today in a project, and you look at their website and they're still talking about the executive director and the board of members that were there 3 years ago. They don't update their website. So if a donor is interested in putting in money and then they find that the information is not accurate, they will think twice about your organization. It's extremely important. Talking about logos and branding, these are just some of the logos that that my team did for the different projects we had. Trying to keep it simple, using the iconography of a particular country or region. You have some amazing figures here that you can use. Keep it simple. Tell the story of your beneficiaries. In fundraising, this is essential. Who is your institution serving? What are their stories? What impact is your work having on the community and its members? How will you use the resources that are raised? And demonstrate how your work impacts the lives of others. So, and in a lot of campaigns where I would send out a card, I would tell the story of the family and how the program is affecting this family. And use a simple, this is a beautiful photo of a child. It tells you clearly this is, solar energy that is impacting the life of a family living in rural Mongolia. Keep it simple. So these are tools that are extremely important in resource mobilization. We've already talked about social media a little bit. Should we take a break then for lunch? Are we all set for? Okay, we can continue then. Yeah, just let me know when. So the use of social media is absolutely essential. How many of you have a Facebook page for your organization? Pretty much all. That's great. It's important that you update it. But it is one of the most important tools in your resource mobilization efforts. And what I understand that Facebook is the biggest social media entity in Mongolia, correct? Yes. Everybody who is educated and has Facebook. Is that pretty the case? It's great. It's also is a double-edged sword, as we've seen with some of the scandals and some of the issues of managing data. And data that you as an organization own, you have to be extremely careful about how you manage it. Part of the problem that Facebook has is that it sold its data. You have the case of Cambridge Analytica that got it sort of indirectly, but used it in a political campaign. You cannot give your data or sell it to another organization because you are violating the confidentiality of the people who have given you money or who have asked to be sent information. Organizations in the States and other places sell their data. And I find that when I subscribe to something, I will get many emails or messages from a similar organization. It's clear that my data was shared or sold. And you can actually buy data lists. But you as an organization have to protect the confidentiality of your data. And if you have an employee that's managing your data, that person has to sign an agreement that he or she cannot take the data with them. Extremely important, because then they go work for a rival organization and they have a list of all your donors and contributors and supporters. So you have to protect your data. Data privacy for me is an extremely important issue. You don't want your information all over the place, especially with all the problems that exist with faking and IDs and so on. You all agree? Sustainability. Well, any questions about marketing communications before we slightly change course? No questions, no comments? Yes?
Well, you talked about how important it is to have someone in your organization that's designated for fundraising and things like that. What's your view on having a dedicated communications?
If you can afford it, it would be useful. If you can't, often the executive director has to assume part of that function. It really depends on the institutional capacity of the organization. Ideally, you should have somebody or have somebody part-time that you can bring in for specific support, or you can have a volunteer that can help you with that. But as your organization grows, it is good to have somebody there as much, it could be part-time, you know, and then eventually it could be full-time. But I've seen organizations that manage many, in the case of the museum is one case, but I've seen social organizations that have budgets of millions of dollars and do not have a marketing communications person. And you see screw-ups because of that. So it's important that you have, one, the strategy and your plan for marketing communications, and have at least some level of support depending on what the structure and the financial capacity is of the organization. Any other questions about market? Yes?
Can you explain to us the meaning of term social entrepreneur? What does it mean?
Okay. A social entrepreneur is an entrepreneur that has a social focus to what they're doing. Okay. And I would measure a social entrepreneur as somebody who's doing something innovative in a particular field. It can be in the social field, it can be in the business field. To me, an entrepreneur is not just a person who's starting a business. I've seen programs for entrepreneur, which is basically, you know, how you register your company, how you get it going, And that's what's considered an entrepreneur. To me, an entrepreneur is much more than somebody who has the capacity to set up a new business or an enterprise. So an entrepreneur also has what I describe as the entrepreneurial spirit. And it's a subject that I'm fascinated about, and my next book is going to be about entrepreneurship, the spirit of entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship to me has the different components. One, persistence. Second, have a vision, have a dream of, I want to do something that will have an impact. It is having an idea of how what one is doing can impact the lives of others, or can impact the environment, or can impact children. It is, the social aspect means that there's a social component to being an entrepreneur, but I think there are a lot of overlaps between a business and a social entrepreneur. An entrepreneur also means being able to take risks. An entrepreneur who can't take risks is not going to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to, I don't believe that you are born an entrepreneur. I think one can learn a lot of the skills, but the spirit of being an entrepreneur, I think, comes from your own passion, your own interest, and your own commitments. The other part of a social entrepreneur is they have to know how to build a team. If you think you can become a social entrepreneur or an entrepreneur of any kind and do it on yourself, by yourself, forget it. Because it's only when you build a team that you can start escalating whatever dream or idea that you may have. It also means establishing the organizational framework that allow for your idea to flourish. And that can be a non-for-profit, it can be a foundation, it can be an association, it can be a company. But just to have a dream and say, well, I dream on helping low-income children to become productive. Fine, you can have that dream, but if you don't do something practical to make it happen, it will be just that, a dream. So a social entrepreneur has to have the capacity to convert a dream or an idea into something that is practical. Does that help a little bit? Any other questions? Yes.
The last time you mentioned about like ensuring the safety of the organizational data, so I really talk about more because it's kind of in any organization it's kind of the simple, like very common. People use their like personal emails and like CC to everyone, like more than 20 people and stuff, and save their like organizational data and everywhere because we don't think it's gonna make a big deal. Like, so what could it make it bring, what kind of damage, and have to like ensure the safety and stuff?
Well, data safety is absolutely critical. Because whatever you put down in writing, even if you erase it, there will be always possibilities of access. And you're now seeing all the standards in Washington regarding to all the data breaches and hacking and so on. You can assume that pretty much any data that's out there can be hacked. So assume that anything that you are sending, somebody can access at some point. So you have to be very careful of what you're sharing. And you also have to be careful who you are sharing it with.
So there should be like an organizational policy for like sharing information.
Yes, it's really good to have a policy. And it's good to have a policy also because if you have an email that is of your organization and have a policy that should not be used for personal exchanges. There's some things that will, but there have been cases within an organization where two people are in love and they're telling their love story in emails that are exchanged and then it comes out. You know, it creates a problem. Or there are financial things going on. And you see now with all the campaign problems in the United States, that there was a lot of information that was shared through the email that is legally compromised. So I've learned more and more to be very cautious about what I share on the web and also careful what you share with WhatsApp. Is WhatsApp still already widely used here? Yeah, it's it's probably less risky with WhatsApp, but still it is data that's out there. So it is good to have a policy, and it's good to stick to it, and to be sure that everybody is clear about it. And then you also have to be careful about who has access to your data. Who has the, are we ready or not?
It's all set.
Okay. So it's extremely important who is controlling that data. Because what happens if you have a disgruntled employee, or is that employee is going to go work for another organization that wants to take all that data with them? So having a data management policy is extremely important. But at the same time, organizations more and more are looking at data to measure impact. And data management, data visualization is becoming an important tool in the development world and also in fundraising. There are companies that now work on data management and visualization. USAID works a lot on data management. So part of your work as an institution should be to gather as much data as you can, but also process it and be very clear about how it's structured and who has access to it. But the word data management and data visualization is a growing field. And my daughter has been worked for Millennium Challenge Corporation, and she is her expertise is data management and visualization. That's what she does. And she travels internationally working with MCC and PEPFAR on data management. So it is extremely important that as you are gathering data of the people you're serving, the services you're providing, that you are able to process it and then be able to share that with donors or investors in what you're doing. Yes.
So I think this theme is important as our organization. So my question is, in your experiences, what is the key to developing a good team?
Well, a good team, I think, is having a balance of people. One, I think, a balance that, one, from a gender perspective, I think it is very important that any team have as many men as women on the team. I've seen also that in the social area, there are usually more women. But in the business sector, it's mainly men, and I think there should always be a balance as much as possible. There should also be a balance from a cultural perspective. You know, in the States, perhaps more of an issue with the grand diversity of cultures that you have in the United States. But I have seen many social organizations that serve the African American community, and there's not one African American on the staff. So I think the cultural diversity is also important. But it's also important that you have a diversity of skill sets and that you have people that have people skills. You don't want somebody on your team that's going to be constantly creating problems. So emotional intelligence is important as part of your team. You want people that will relate to others, because a lot of what we're doing is building relationships. And if there's somebody there who's constantly creating conflicts, you don't want that person to be part of your team. You also want to make sure that you have, I think, different generations involved. I think there's a lot to be learned from people who are older and have gained years of experience, might not be as savvy and use the social media, but have a lot of skill sets. And I think there's more and more realization that people who are considered retirement age can contribute a lot to an organization. In some cases as a volunteer, in other cases as a professional. So I think it's also very important to have a diversity in terms of age groups. And then also in terms of mindsets. You don't want somebody who everybody has the main mindset. Some can be more liberal, some could be more progressive, more conservative. I'm a keen believer in having as much diversity as possible, but to have a common ground of being able to interact in a positive way with other people. And then you want people to have the skill sets, that if they're hired to do proposals, that they can do proposals. And that they also can be self-critical. Because if you have somebody on your team and you say, well, this, please correct it, it's wrong, and they'll say, no, it's fine, I don't need to correct it. If somebody is not going to be self-critical, you're going to have trouble. Does that help? Ready for a break?
Let's take a lunch break.
Okay, great.
Okay, now?
We'll come back in about 45 minutes.